There are people who walk through life as though wrapped in silence. Not because the world has nothing to offer them, but because the noise of human presence feels heavier than solitude itself. They move quietly, preferring the company of their own thoughts over conversations that demand performance. To most, they seem detached, withdrawn, maybe even cold, yet within them lies an entire universe of emotion, a depth that words could never fully carry. They are not running away from humanity, they are retreating into themselves, into a place where peace is not earned through attention, but through understanding. Sometimes, they stand at the edge of a crowded room, their mind drifting like an echo in a canyon. Every voice blurs into an indistinct hum, every laugh sounds rehearsed, and they wonder if connection has always been this artificial. It isn't that they despise people, it's that they feel too much. Human interaction, for them, is not a simple exchange of words, it's an emotional transaction, one that drains rather than fills. Their silence is not absence, it's self-preservation. The psychology behind people who avoid human interaction often stems from the quiet weight of emotional exhaustion. Psychologists call this pattern social withdrawal, a behavioral form of avoidant coping, when a person distances themselves from others to shield their mind from perceived emotional threats. For some, it grows from early emotional neglect, where they learned that opening up often led to being unseen. For others, it's a form of self-protection, the mind's way of saying, "You've felt too much already, it's time to rest." In childhood, these individuals may have discovered that their emotions were too complex for others to understand. They learned early that silence was safer than vulnerability. The world rewarded them when they pretended to be fine, and punished them when they showed their true feelings. Over time, they built invisible walls, not out of pride, but necessity. Walls that protected their sensitivity from being dismissed or misunderstood. These walls, however, became homes. And after years of living inside them, they forgot how to step out. They often observe humanity like an artist studies a painting, admiring it, understanding it, yet never feeling a part of it. They know what connection means, they even crave it, but the fear of being emotionally drained or misunderstood is stronger. This paradox, wanting closeness yet avoiding it, becomes the quiet ache of their existence. Psychologists describe it as ambivalent attachment, the push and pull of desiring love but fearing its demands. These people aren't broken, they're just cautious souls living in emotional economies where energy is sacred. When they withdraw, it isn't rebellion. It's reflection. The silence they choose becomes their therapy, a way to recalibrate their emotions after being overwhelmed by the chaos of human behavior. Some call them loners, others mistake them for arrogant or strange. But what's really happening is that their empathy has turned inward. Their sensitivity to others' energy makes them easily overstimulated, so they protect themselves by limiting exposure. They are the kind of people who feel tension in the air before anyone speaks. They sense disappointment hidden behind smiles. They notice how words don't always match eyes. And in this constant awareness, they grow tired. Their avoidance is not ignorance, it's sensitivity heightened to the point of exhaustion. In a world obsessed with visibility, these people find comfort in being unseen. Because being unseen means they don't have to perform. It means they can breathe without explaining who they are or why they feel so deeply. For them, solitude is not emptiness, it's alignment. It's the moment where their inner world finally matches the quiet outside. There's also something deeply philosophical about their distance. To avoid human interaction is, in many ways, to reject the superficial layers of modern connection. They often sense the hollowness in social rituals, the performative smiles, the empty compliments, the endless small talk that drowns out authenticity. Their withdrawal is not always pain-driven, sometimes, it's truth-driven. They are searching for realness in a world built on masks. These people are thinkers, observers, and silent healers. They spend more time analyzing human behavior than participating in it. They are philosophers by nature, often caught between fascination and disillusionment with humanity. Some of them write, some paint, some simply think, but all of them carry the same silent longing, to connect without losing themselves. And yet, behind their calm exterior, there's often a quiet loneliness, one that hums beneath every moment of peace. Because solitude, while comforting, can sometimes echo too loudly. The absence of connection can start to feel like an absence of meaning. This is where their inner conflict begins, between the desire to be alone and the human need to be understood. This inner tug-of-war is the essence of cognitive dissonance, where the mind seeks peace but the heart seeks belonging. Still, in that paradox lies their beauty. They are not afraid of being alone because they have learned to find themselves there. Their distance is not rejection, it's reverence, for silence, for truth, for authenticity. They are not broken, they are simply learning to protect their emotional rhythm in a world that moves too fast. Perhaps one day, they will meet someone who speaks their silence fluently, someone whose presence feels like solitude, not disruption. Until then, they remain wanderers in their own minds, quietly studying the world from behind the glass of introspection. Because for them, peace is not found in the crowd, it's found in the echo of their own understanding. The psychology behind people who avoid human interaction is layered, fragile, and deeply human. Beneath their quiet exterior lies a history of unspoken emotions, the kind that were once dismissed, forgotten, or misunderstood. Many of them didn't choose solitude, they adapted to it. They learned that silence was the safest language when the world failed to listen. Psychologists often describe this as avoidant attachment, a pattern rooted in early experiences where love felt conditional, and emotional safety was never guaranteed. When people grow up in environments where affection feels inconsistent, where warmth can turn cold without warning, their minds begin to associate closeness with unpredictability. So they learn to find comfort in control, and control often looks like distance. By avoiding human interaction, they regulate what the world cannot, the uncertainty of emotional response. To them, solitude becomes not just a choice, but a sanctuary, a place where expectations vanish and authenticity is restored. Inside these individuals, there's a quiet storm of paradoxes. They crave intimacy yet fear exposure. They long for understanding yet flinch at vulnerability. This emotional contradiction is a product of what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, when two opposing desires exist within the same heart, each pulling the other apart. To engage with people is to risk being misunderstood, to withdraw is to risk being forgotten. And so, they hover between the two, never fully present, never completely absent. But avoidance isn't always fear, sometimes, it's wisdom. These people are highly observant. They read emotions before they're spoken. They can sense disappointment in tone, feel resentment in silence, and recognize manipulation disguised as kindness. This acute emotional intelligence becomes both a gift and a burden. It allows them to understand people too deeply, yet it also leaves them disillusioned. When you can see through pretenses, connection loses its magic. What remains is the longing for purity, a connection free of masks, noise, and games. So they retreat. Not out of hatred for others, but out of reverence for authenticity. The solitude they choose is not rejection, it's refinement. It's the filtering of unnecessary noise, the cleansing of overstimulation, the act of protecting one's emotional energy. In psychology, this can be linked to sensory and emotional sensitivity, where the nervous system responds more intensely to external stimuli. For them, every word, every glance, every shift in energy is felt deeply, so deeply that interaction becomes draining instead of fulfilling. Many of them carry invisible memories, moments of reaching out and finding nothing. Moments of honesty met with indifference. Over time, the mind builds patterns from these experiences, teaching them that vulnerability equals pain. So, they begin to protect themselves with silence, wrapping it around their soul like armor. But this armor doesn't harden them, it isolates them. Because no matter how strong the walls, the heart still beats against them, quietly aching for connection. What's fascinating, and tragic, is that their withdrawal often gets misread. The world labels them as antisocial, cold, or arrogant. But in reality, their distance is often compassion in disguise. They withdraw because they don't want to burden others with their emotional intensity. They hold back because they fear overwhelming someone with their truth. It's not rejection, it's restraint. They love deeply, but they love quietly. They care more than they show, but less than they feel allowed to. And yet, within this quiet resistance, there's profound wisdom. These people understand the fragility of human emotion, how easily it can be broken, how rarely it's handled with care. They've seen how easily people speak without listening, promise without meaning, and connect without depth. So instead of participating in what feels shallow, they choose depth in isolation. In that stillness, they rebuild their identity not around approval, but around peace. There's also a philosophical truth beneath this behavior. Avoidance, at its core, is not a flaw, it's a mirror. It reflects a society that glorifies connection yet rarely practices empathy. We call them withdrawn, but maybe they are the ones who feel the world too vividly to play along with its pretense. Their solitude is a quiet protest, a refusal to dilute their essence to fit into the shallow rhythm of modern interaction. But even silence has limits. When isolation becomes a pattern, the same walls that once protected them start to confine them. They begin to feel the weight of their own absence in the world, the realization that hiding from pain also means hiding from joy. This awareness is often the beginning of their transformation. It's the point where self-protection begins to evolve into self-understanding. As they grow older, many of them begin to see their solitude not as an escape, but as a teacher. They start to question why connection frightens them, why vulnerability feels unsafe, and why the heart trembles at the idea of being seen. In those reflections, they begin to uncover the roots of their avoidance, and slowly, healing begins. Because true healing doesn't mean forcing themselves into social spaces. It means learning to interact without fear of losing themselves. It means realizing that human interaction doesn't always have to drain, it can also heal, if it's real. They learn that the key is not to avoid people, but to choose them wisely. To find those rare souls whose presence feels like peace, not pressure. And in that understanding lies growth. They begin to open up, carefully, gently, not to everyone, but to those who speak the language of emotional safety. Their interactions become fewer but deeper, their words become softer but truer. The same sensitivity that once isolated them now guides them toward genuine connection. Avoidance, then, is not the end of connection, it's the pause before it. A moment of quiet introspection before deciding who deserves to enter their silence. It's the soul's way of recalibrating its compass, ensuring that the next interaction is not just another performance, but a meeting of truth and understanding. There comes a moment in their quiet lives when solitude begins to whisper lessons instead of comfort. It asks them why the walls feel safer than arms, why silence feels more honest than conversation. And slowly, they begin to realize that what they once called peace was sometimes just avoidance dressed as serenity. Avoidance born not from strength, but from fear, the fear of being hurt, misunderstood, or invisible again. In psychology, this behavior can be traced to emotional self-protection, an unconscious mechanism of the mind. When someone has felt emotionally exposed too early, when love came with conditions, when trust was broken, the psyche learns to protect itself by retreating. It builds layers of stillness, as if each moment of silence could guard the heart from disappointment. But the truth is, no wall is ever high enough to block longing. Because the human soul, no matter how guarded, always hungers for resonance. They may tell themselves they don't need people, yet their eyes still search for understanding in the quiet corners of life. The contradiction is painful, to want connection but fear what it demands. Psychologists sometimes call this the avoidant ambivalent loop, the cycle where emotional distance feels safe, but isolation feels empty. Each time they pull away, they feel protected, each time they are alone, they feel hollow. The mind breathes relief while the heart mourns. To survive this paradox, they begin to intellectualize their feelings. They explain away their isolation as logic: people drain me, I'm better off alone, no one really understands. And though there is truth in those statements, underneath them hides a wounded plea: please let me not need anyone, so I never have to be disappointed again. Their self-protection is not arrogance, it's grief sculpted into independence. They learn that the only safe place to rest is within themselves. They become self-reliant, composed, untouchable. But beneath that independence lies exhaustion. Because carrying the weight of one's own emotions without ever letting anyone hold a piece of it, that's a quiet kind of fatigue the world never sees. Philosophically, their journey is the embodiment of the human paradox, the tension between connection and individuality. To exist is to need others, yet to stay whole is to guard oneself. They walk this tightrope every day, balancing vulnerability against survival. And though the world praises strength, few understand that true strength is not in the wall, but in the willingness to let it fall. When they begin to awaken to this realization, something shifts. Solitude, once their refuge, starts to feel like a mirror, one that reflects not comfort, but isolation. They start to notice the silence between their own thoughts, the absence of laughter that once filled their days. And within that awareness blooms a question: what am I protecting myself from now, the world, or my own memories of it? That question becomes the seed of transformation. They begin to understand that avoidance, though once necessary, no longer serves them. It kept them safe when they were fragile, but now it keeps them distant when they long to be seen. Healing, they realize, isn't about breaking the walls overnight, it's about gently opening windows in them. Allowing light, and maybe another soul, to enter, slowly, without forcing. In this stage, they often experience what psychologists describe as emotional reintegration, the gradual return to openness. It doesn't happen dramatically. It happens quietly, in small acts of trust. In the way they share a story they once kept hidden. In the way they stay in a conversation a little longer before retreating. Healing for them isn't loud, it's tender, deliberate, and deeply introspective. Through introspection, they begin to see that not all interaction leads to pain. They start to distinguish between chaos and connection, between people who drain and those who nourish. Their emotional intelligence becomes a compass, guiding them toward authenticity. They realize that boundaries don't have to be walls, they can be doors with locks, opened for those who knock gently. There's a quiet beauty in their growth. They start to rediscover humanity in small gestures, a kind smile, an honest word, a moment of empathy that doesn't demand anything in return. These simple interactions remind them that connection, when pure, doesn't wound, it heals. And so, they begin to trust again, not blindly, but consciously. In this awakening, philosophy meets psychology. They understand that solitude was never the enemy, fear was. The fear of being seen in their rawest form, the fear of needing others, the fear of repeating old pain. But healing is not about erasing fear, it's about walking with it, hand in hand, until it softens into understanding. As they evolve, their perception of people changes. They no longer categorize humanity as threat or safety. They see that everyone carries their own walls, their own quiet self-protections. And in that realization, empathy blossoms. The very sensitivity that once drove them away from people now draws them closer, not out of need, but compassion. They recognize the same fragility in others that once lived in them. This is the turning point. The moment when avoidance begins to dissolve into awareness. When silence stops being an escape and becomes a language of mindfulness. They no longer avoid interaction to hide, they choose solitude to recharge. They no longer fear vulnerability, they embrace it as a form of truth. Because in the end, connection doesn't mean losing oneself, it means finding pieces of oneself in another. Healing doesn't arrive like a storm, it unfolds like dawn, slowly, softly, as light begins to touch the places that once knew only darkness. For people who have spent years avoiding human interaction, the return to connection feels like learning how to breathe again. Not because they've forgotten how, but because they're learning to do it without fear. Each inhale is a risk, each exhale a release, a quiet surrender to the rhythm of life they once distanced themselves from. At first, they don't even notice the change. It begins subtly, a conversation that lingers longer than expected, a small laugh that doesn't feel forced, a moment of eye contact that doesn't trigger retreat. These tiny openings become the bridges between who they were and who they're becoming. Slowly, they rediscover the art of human presence, not the loud, performative kind, but the still, genuine one that feels like being understood without explanation. The psychology of their healing lies in reconnection, not just with others, but with themselves. For so long, they believed isolation was a form of control, a way to protect their emotions. But as they begin to trust again, they realize that emotional safety isn't found in avoidance, it's found in discernment. It's not about avoiding people, it's about choosing the right ones. This shift is a quiet revolution within their mind, a rewiring of old beliefs shaped by pain. Psychologists often refer to this as earned security, when someone who once feared attachment begins to form healthy, stable connections through awareness and trust. They begin to notice that vulnerability doesn't have to mean exposure, it can mean freedom. To be seen without judgment is not to lose power, but to reclaim it. They learn that sharing emotions isn't weakness, it's a form of strength that binds humanity together. And so, little by little, they let the world back in, cautiously, intentionally, but with an open heart. Philosophically, this stage of growth reflects the human paradox of isolation and belonging. Every person must retreat at some point to understand themselves, but remaining there forever means mistaking protection for peace. True peace, they realize, is not the absence of others, it's the presence of authenticity. It's being surrounded by people and still feeling like yourself. In their quiet re-emergence, they begin to sense a different kind of connection, one that doesn't demand, perform, or pretend. They gravitate toward people who listen more than they speak, who understand pauses as much as words. For them, these rare connections are not social exchanges, they're spiritual alignments. They no longer chase crowds, because they've learned that one genuine presence can feel louder than 1,000 hollow conversations. And yet, they never lose their love for solitude, it remains sacred. But now, it's no longer an escape, it's a sanctuary. It's a place they visit, not live in. Solitude becomes a companion, not a cage. In this balance between solitude and connection, they find something extraordinary: peace without isolation, connection without exhaustion. There's a beautiful irony in their transformation. The same people who once avoided human interaction end up understanding humanity the most. Their distance gave them perspective. Their silence taught them empathy. Their loneliness became the mirror through which they finally understood love. They no longer see people as sources of pain, but as reflections of their own complexity. Every interaction becomes a reminder that everyone is fighting invisible battles, that every smile hides a story. In this stage, they no longer fear vulnerability, they honor it. They speak with honesty, listen with depth, and connect with intention. They've learned that not every space deserves their energy, but some spaces are worth their presence entirely. They have evolved from avoidance to awareness, from silence to serenity. Emotionally, they are no longer protecting themselves from the world, they are participating in it consciously. They've learned to draw boundaries without walls, to love without losing, to care without collapsing. Their psychology is no longer defined by avoidance, but by understanding. They have turned what was once their coping mechanism into a form of wisdom, the wisdom to know when to retreat and when to reach out. And perhaps that's the greatest transformation of all, realizing that it was never about avoiding people, it was about learning to meet them differently. Not through fear, but through clarity. Not with performance, but with presence. They no longer hide behind silence, they speak through it. They no longer seek validation, they embody self-worth. Their story becomes a testament to every soul who ever felt safer in distance. It's proof that solitude doesn't have to end in loneliness, it can lead to enlightenment. That avoiding human interaction doesn't mean rejecting humanity, it can mean learning to return to it with open eyes. Because to truly connect, one must first understand what it means to be alone. And in that understanding lies peace, the kind that doesn't depend on the noise of the world, but flows quietly from within. A peace that whispers, "I no longer fear the crowd, because I have finally met myself."